Three, two, one, here we go. RAINMAN'S Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey, everybody, it's the Rain Man. I want to welcome my guest, Andrew Oot, who's the executive director of the Lux Art Institute up here in Encinitas, California. Andrew, how you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing great, man. Really good to see you, Brian.
Nice. Well, listen, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and a couple of reasons why I wanted to have Andrew on. Not only is he the executive director at Lux, but within the next couple of months, they are going to merge with the San Diego Art Institute into a group called the Institute for Contemporary Art. So there's a lot of very exciting things going on at Lux right now, and then we're going to kind of dive into Andrew's sort of his training and idea or a topic that he's passionate about, and I am too, because I find it fascinating. That is the relationship between art and culture, and then what happens to that when museums are looted. And that's happened throughout history. The one that Andrew and I got talking about was in 2003 in the U.S. invasion of Iraq in Baghdad, when the Museum of Natural History in Baghdad was looted. And it's Andrew, why don't you about your background and how you got to be the executive director at Lux?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in San Diego. I'm going to start off with my birth. Actually,
we'll start from the beginning.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start almost from before I was born. I was born into an art family, so I almost didn't really have a choice. This is this is just my family. It's in my genes. My mother studied environmental design. My father's an architect. Both my grandparents were fashion designers. It's in my blood. So I love it. It is part of who I am, and I'm so glad that I can be in this career, especially in something that I love and make a difference in the community. You know, it hits all the heartstrings, and it makes me feel good. It makes the people of the world feel good, and you know, connecting with art is a really unique thing. I know sometimes people feel intimidated by art, but for me, it's such a passion, and I really am often looking forward to getting people to kind of think alternatively, think creatively about the world around them. So to tell you a little bit about my history, I got my undergrad at the California College of Arts and Crafts. It has since changed to just California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And I studied art. Specifically, I studied studio art. I used to make wood furniture, which is a very interesting topic, and I did graphic design, but I also got very passionate about the history of photography, and more specifically, and I think this was really a turning point for me, the visual criticism. And I'm going to very briefly explain what visual criticism
Absolutely.
is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Many of us think of when someone says literacy, you think, okay, this is all about reading, right? Well, visual criticism and visual literacy are very united, and visual literacy is about understanding images, how we look at the world around us. And many of us don't even realize, but we're actually getting lessons all the time. We're getting lessons like crazy. We get advertisements on our phone. We get it on billboards. We get it just out in the public. We see it on brands, on t-shirts. All of that is visual literacy. It's our relationship to the images and the objects that we see in our environment. And to me, literally everything that is man-made is art. The table that I'm sitting in front of, the chair that I'm sitting on, the building that I'm sitting in. Actually, it was built by a really well-known architect, so it's also another level of art. But everything around me is art, and so I appreciate it as such. It's the way that someone has thought about how to present ideas to someone. So after school, I ended up working at numerous museums. Actually, the first museum that I started in is called the Mingay International Museum. It's in Balboa Park in San Diego when I was 21 years old. And then I ended up living in France. I ended up living in Argentina. And then I met my wife in Argentina. She's Colombian. And so we lived in Colombia for 6 years. I had a fine art gallery there. And I moved back to San Diego with my wife about 6 years ago. But during all that time, I had some really great experiences in terms of traveling exhibitions all over the world. I used to sell exhibitions to major museums. I've literally sold exhibitions to museums on every continent except Antarctica. So I'm really lucky to have had this very fortunate experience to be able to connect with so many different cultures across the world and so many different languages. And I think that's a really important part of what I'm bringing to San Diego and bringing to the art world. When I came back to the US, I got my master's degree in museum studies at Harvard University. And it was a point for me that I don't even think I realized at the time, but it was so instrumental to the way that I thought about art and I thought about how to collect art. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to collect objects and what it means to preserve objects a little bit later. But I'll kind of lead into, I ended up at Lux because I had actually taken a step back from the art world. I was like, I need a break from this. I worked in tech for a little bit of time, for a couple of years. And then I got a call and they said, hey, you should send your resume for this job at this organization. So I sent my resume, not thinking that I would ever go back into the art world. And then all of a sudden, Lux appeared out of nowhere. And I was like, this is amazing. This is a beautiful space. And so I came and they hired me, and after a 6-month long interview process, and then I've been running this place, and then the pandemic hits and everything is just kind of like thrown out the window. Well, during that process, I was reevaluating all the partnerships that we're doing, all the programs that were taking place, and thinking about how to think beyond the pandemic even. And, when you're in the pandemic, all you're thinking about is, how do I make things virtual? How do I start a podcast like Rainman's Take? How do I like do something different, reach new people, reach a broader audience, right? And I'm thinking like 2, 5, 10 years down the road, like what is this organization going to look like? And so I reached out to the San Diego Art Institute, who we had a relationship with, and I said, hey, what are we trying to do here? We're really trying to support contemporary art. We're trying to support ideas in San Diego County. Let's do it together. And so we started having conversations. The board got involved. We got funding to make it happen. And then we did it. We merged our two organizations. And now we've become the Institute of Contemporary Art San Diego.
And is that official, that merger's done and you are now ICA?
So depending upon when this podcast comes out, September 10th is our official launch date. Yeah. Okay. So September 10th, for those who are looking back on this podcast from years in advance, September 10th, 2021 is when we have officially launched the Institute of Contemporary Art at San Diego. And ICAs are actually a well-known set of institutions. There's about a dozen across the US. The first one began in the 1930s with the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. It's a fantastic, amazing building and space and collection. In fact, they just started collecting about 5 years ago. So contemporary art institutions, and ICA specifically, are non-collecting museums. And I want to make that very clear because, and I'll talk a little bit about this, when you think about the globe and when you think about museums, you go to see artwork that's on the walls, that's going to be there, and you are confident that it's going to be there, right? And that it's collected and preserved, right? The idea of museums, though, is starting to change. And this is something that I think really caught on to me when I was in my museum studies program, is what does it mean to be a museum now, right? What does it mean for reaching the community? What does it mean for the objects that you collect, how you preserve them and how you present them, and ultimately how you build visual literacy in our community? So forgive me if I'm talking too much, because I'll just keep going.
Yeah. And real quick, let me stop you here, because there's a great point in the conversation. So what's the new website? Where can people go to learn more about because I would assume luxartinstitute.org goes away, right? In September
It'll
10th or?
Yeah, it'll be forwarded to our
Okay.
new website, and our new website is icasandiego.org.
Gotcha.
icasandiego.org.
And
Yeah.
is that website up and operational right now? So people can
Not
go and,
yet.
not yet.
No,
Okay. So
very soon, in
got it.
about a week and a half or so, it'll
Okay.
be up. Yeah, and it's a really exciting website because it is up right now with some basic information, so it's not
Gotcha.
empty.
Right.
But the new website will be up in about a week and a half,
Okay.
and that website actually is even more exciting because, I've never worked on a website like this. It is mobile first, which means that it is made for your phone.
Okay.
And it is responsive for the computer. So you can see everything on the computer screen, but it's actually much more engaging if you use your phone.
Very cool.
Yeah,
That makes sense. Everybody's got their phone. Not everybody has their computer with them.
exactly.
So before we get going, I just want to just kind of let everybody know about Lux and what they've been doing for the last. I mean, Lux has been around for what, 15 years, almost 20 years.
23 years.
23 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my wife and I have been involved with Lux for, gosh, coming up probably 10 years in some capacity or another. And it's a really beautiful space, like you talked about. I mean, it's just a really, really cool spot. However, it's kind of tucked up in the bluffs overlooking one of the roads here in Encinitas on El Camino Real. And so what I found was not a lot of people knew it was even there. And then when they get there, they're like, this is unbelievable. And the one thing that I found really cool about Lux, and I would assume even when you become ICA, you're still going to be doing these same things with the artists and residents and all that. Yeah, they underneath the gallery, they actually have an apartment. And what they do is they hire an artist, and they come and spend 5 weeks at the museum or at the gallery in the apartment. And during that 5 weeks, they'll have their works up on display, but they'll also be creating one of their pieces while they're there. So when kids come for field trips, or when just the general population is going to the gallery, and if it's at the time when the artist is up there working on them, they can actually watch the stuff being created real time. And I think that is just about as cool as it gets. So Lux is really cool, and when it becomes ICA, it's going to stay as cool and probably get even better. And so I just wanted to let everybody kind of know what that gallery is all about. And then I might as well throw this out right now, Andrew, and you're going to realize this as we talk. I am a complete rock when it comes to art. So I mean, I'm one of those guys. I appreciate it when I see it, but I don't necessarily fully understand it. I've been to some of the most beautiful galleries in the world. Bilbao, Spain, comes to mind, and we'll probably chat about that in a second. But what really got me, and I'm really interested to kind of weave this whole thing through our conversation. What really got me to just appreciate it, even though I don't necessarily understand it, to learn to appreciate it was. I first watched the movie on an airplane, on a flight, the Monuments Men, and then I came back and I read the book, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Those books were talking about the pillaged art during World War II and the Nazis, what they did throughout Europe, and then of course more recently I just read a book called The Thieves of Baghdad, which talks about the looting of the Baghdad Museum. So that reading those two books just gave me a much more of an appreciation for art, in the sense that, you know, that's culture that's being stolen, being destroyed. And whether you agree with the art, whether you like it or you don't like it, there's something very below the surface that's supremely important about those things. And when they're gone, you know, obviously cultures take a hit for that. So sorry, the little bit of a long-winded way of saying that you're the expert that I want to talk to about this stuff.
Thanks so much. Well, you know, Brian, one of the things that I think you're absolutely right on is everyone, I think, I want to say like 99% of the world is just like you, in the sense of they don't understand art, and they don't understand the history of it. They haven't been engaged with it. It's a rarity that you'll even know the extent of engagement with art, like you knowing about the Monuments Men and the the things that happened in Baghdad. And there's so many other really interesting situations too. I'll bring up also the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston.
Yes. Yep.
That's a pretty well known one too, and mainly because they're so committed to the preservation and the understanding and the history of the loss of their works. I'll talk about that more. That they've actually kind of situated a huge brand and identity around it. It's actually kind of been to their benefit, which I think is quite interesting. But most people don't realize that they actually do know about art. Because the great thing about art is you don't have to actually know anything. It's oftentimes there's a lot of BS that's involved, because what it is, it's an opinion. It's someone who has created something based on how they feel, what they think, how they perceive the world, and they just have to trust that everyone else around them will either see it like they do or have a different interpretation. And when you get into like texts that talk about like art history, and texts that talk about artwork, all that are opinions. Right. None of this is really the truth. And even artists, their ideas evolve in such depth of conversations about what's happening in the world, what their ideas about how things work and how the world works. I mean, if you look at like Impressionism, there are actually multiple different ways of what Impressionism actually means for the world. I mean, most people know, Van Gogh or Cezanne or Seurat, with pointillism. There's or Monet. These are really famous artists, and they say it was about their impression on the canvas, right? The impression of light on the canvas. But if you notice, actually, a lot of the Impressionist paintings actually involved industry in them. They involved buildings. They involved trains. There was a bridge in almost all of Monet's paintings, at Giverny Gardens. And so all of that work actually touches on the affect of industrialized countries changing the environment, which is very relevant nowadays. Right. We think about how the world is being affected environmentally, and we think about what kind of things we're doing to affect that environment. They're thinking about that same thing 150 years ago when the Industrial Revolution started. It was artists who were thinking about it, artists who were interpreting those things. So all of these things are opinions. It's a way of looking at things, and that's what visual literacy is. It's about refining the way that you look at things. So I'm going to use a little bit of visual literacy on you and your listeners today, which is thinking about the need and the desire to have objects and things around you. Now, this is like a really big topic, but it's very essential to what it means to actually collect objects in a museum. Why do you have things in your house? Let's start with you, Brian. Why do you have things in your house?
And that's actually a great. So, and the simple answer is because usually my wife loves it and she thinks it would look great in the house. The more detailed answer, I would say this, and what immediately comes to mind is when we were in the south of France, in this little village of Saint Paul de Vence outside of Nice, there was a art gallery in this little quaint little medieval looking hilltop village, and the artist's name was Tron, Tron. And we went in there, and first of all, you're just walking through this gorgeous little village. So the vibe, you're open to just the beauty of where you are. And then we go into this gallery, and most of Tron's work is really thick strokes, really almost three-dimensional in terms of the oil and just the really cool, deep, rich colors. And so we kind of walk in there already with a really open to new experiences. And immediately the person comes over and we strike up a conversation with Philippe, and we spent about an hour in there with him, and it was just a great. So the everything, it was positive energy that basically we were like, we need to get one of these to bring it home, and it'll look great on our wall, but B, every time I look at that thing, I remember that day. So that's the long answer.
Yeah, it's all about memories, right? Objects carry a lot of memory and it carries a lot of feeling, right? I mean, you had a smile on your face the whole time you were explaining that whole thing, right? It's because it made you feel good.
Yeah.
You want to either feel good or you want to be affected. Sometimes I have artwork in my house that is really intense work, about honestly about death or even genocide. But it makes me think about the world and it makes me feel like it motivates me actually. And I think that also is a really exciting way to think about art. It's not just about how it makes you feel in a good way, but it can also make you feel intense feelings that we may not like.
Right.
So all of these are about feelings and it's about connecting with the object. And then you talk about the history and how that relates to that object. And so it just becomes such a saturated kind of it's imbibed with all of this knowledge and all of this existence. And then eventually, when you take that object and you give it to someone else, they have a completely different experience with that object. There's a great philosopher, really dense work to read, but his name is Heidelberg. And Heidelberg, I don't even remember his first name. Someone will know when they listen to this. But Heidelberg wrote a lot about what it means to have an object or objectivity. And so we think about what is an object, what does it have with it? And when you go to a museum, because I'm going to bring this back to the museum, you're looking at an object that one has a historical value to it, right? We know that it comes from Mesopotamia from 5,000 years ago, right? We know that it has what's called providence, and providence means that it has the history of hands that has passed through. But we don't have all the information of the energy and the knowledge and the experience that people have had with that object. When you go up to the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, right, you know that millions of people have seen that work. Most people don't realize that actually may not be the real Mona Lisa. There's actually like 7 Mona Lisas that
Oh,
are
really?
almost exactly alike. It was stolen from the Louvre originally. I don't know if you know this story, but
I do not.
yeah, so the Mona Lisa was stolen. Before that, it was just like a whatever painting at the Louvre. But because it was stolen and because it had this whole long history, and I'm not going to get into the history of like how it happened and like where, someone took it and then it got moved from one place to another
Yeah.
and then, they found the guys and then they put the piece in. But all the whole reason why it became famous was because it was stolen and because the Louvre put out an advertisement saying it was stolen. So people had this image in their mind. They're like, oh my God, this is the stolen artwork.
Yeah.
We have to find this work, right? And then it just became so famous as the stolen artwork that eventually was recovered that people started to go see it, they started to visit, and then they had to place it in a different position. In the context of the history of art, it really doesn't have very much importance. It's really just the history that it has for us and the importance that we've put on it.
Right.
And that's where I kind of want to get into the idea of what it means to have objects in museums. The objects in museums have been determined to be important.
And
And
is that determined to be important for who? For just the people that are coming through, or for the city where it is in general? What?
that's the big question.
Yeah.
That is the big question. And honestly, I don't have an answer for that, right? Curators determine it oftentimes because they feel like it is one, the most representative artwork in a time period, right? So they can say, okay, this painting by Van Gogh is Starry Night is so important for Impressionism. And so we're going to place this painting here. And some people will say, no, Andrew, that's not true. Starry Night is the most amazing painting. It's so beautiful. The way that his brushstrokes are on there, it just makes me feel good. I can relate to him, right? But I mean, I don't know how many paintings of Van Gogh you've seen, but there are some really amazing paintings that Van Gogh did. I mean, I actually personally, I really love his bouquets that he did. And the bouquets, I think, are much more amazing than Starry Night is. But again, that's about personal opinion. It's about the energy and the happiness and all the things that we individually give to the artwork. So now, you go to a museum, you walk in the museum, right? A famous museum like the Louvre, or let's take even the San Diego Museum of Art. You walk in and you see these objects and you're like, okay, these are important objects. I need to know these. I need to like remember these objects. I need to know what they're about because someone, curator, oftentimes says these are important, right? But what is important? What is important to time? And I know this is like, I'm taking you back a little bit, back to the idea of objectivity.
Yeah.
Why is it important to have objects as well? And so this is where we start thinking about, okay, why do we even collect objects in the first place?
And is it as simple as it's the feeling that it gives you, or is it more the control of it? Or yeah, I mean that's a
All of
fascinating.
that.
Yeah,
It is all of that. I mean, you're hitting on the feeling that it gives you, right? You wanna walk into a museum and you wanna see those artworks and feel good. You wanna also feel knowledgeable. You wanna say like, okay, I know that history, and
right.
that makes me feel good because now I have this new information. And then you also kind of want to feel like you're in that time period where you're like, okay, I know in the 1800s it was like this, right?
Yeah,
But you're also taking, it's like taking a photograph and saying, oh, I know how it was back then. I know what the culture was like. I know what the language was like. I know what words they say. You know, all of that is speculative, right? It's really just kind of curators and historians putting this information on us. And I say this because I am a curator. I understand exactly how that process works, and I'm sort of laying it bare for everyone. You need to also take these things into consideration in your own regard. What does it mean when you go into a museum and look at a piece of artwork? What does it mean to you, not necessarily the curator? It's
yeah.
important to look at the text. It's important to get that information because someone has been studied and they've had knowledge about it and they've spoken to the artist. But it's also important to get your own perspective on things. So all of that aside, now we talk about museums like the one in Baghdad, or I think I even mentioned Palmyra to you as well
Yeah.
in Syria. And Palmyra, it was like it was such a travesty. I think the museum world was just, or the art world in general was just kind of in tears.
And that was just recently, right? Within the last 3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah, I want to say Palmyra was, well, it was during the invasion of, well, when ISIS was growing
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Syria. And so it's, for those who don't know, Palmyra is this ancient town, and it has all of these in Syria, and it has all of these columns and all these structures and designs. There's not really objects because most of it has been looted over
yeah,
thousands of years, right? But the architecture is there, and so it has this such a strong history, especially in that region.
yeah.
It's a history of Mesopotamia meets the empire meets the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is sort of like that transitionary period between these important times in history. And so Palmyra is like this destination location in Syria. It's almost like why you go to Syria.
Yeah. And
Um,
isn't that's the one that they blew up, right? They
they
just
blew it up.
yeah,
They blew up the whole thing, and
they
they
literally
said,
just
"No,
destroyed
screw
it
this
completely.
place." They're like,
Yeah.
we don't want this history. This is not the history that we believe in. This is a Catholic history. This is not the history of. And actually, it's not only like the religious history, but it's also the understanding that we shouldn't be bowing down or thinking of objects as having more importance than God,
Yeah.
too.
The idea of idolatry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Idolatry. That's exactly right. And so if you're idolizing this place, if people are traveling to it, we need to get rid of it,
Wow.
right? And so they got rid of it. I mean, there are still parts of it that remain. Like you can go and there are like there's destroyed parts
Yeah.
on the ground, but yeah, they blew it up, and it's like the images of it are just like so impactful. You're talking about like buildings that have ruins that have been there for thousands of years just being obliterated, right? And
By
it's
a
super.
group that's ISIS that's what 2 or 3 years old, and
Yeah.
they have that hubris to think that they know, that they can dictate what survives and what doesn't, regardless of how old it is.
Yeah.
It's amazing, Andrew. 10 years ago, this stuff wouldn't even have fazed me. Now, the more I read about the history of these sorts of things, it's depressing. it's happened throughout history. And I go back to when the Library of Alexandria was burned. And it was the same thing, like you just said. It was basically the Christian Romans that wanted to get rid of all of that ancient knowledge that was stored there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what the world would be like if that stuff survived through to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so many different points in history of destruction of artwork for the sake of in the name of religion, oftentimes. In fact, many of the Byzantine manuscripts that were like gold leaf, like, so I don't know if you've seen a Byzantine manuscript, like a book in person.
No, I haven't.
It's so incredible, the detail of it. That someone spent like years and years of their lives just to draw every single letter form and every detail on every single page. I mean, it's so much work. And to think that someone actually burned thousands of these books, you're just like, no, how could this happen, right?
Yeah.
Like these things that are so precious and such a reflection of humanity. But all that being said, humanity goes on. We actually know that Palmyra exists. We have it in our history books. We have photos of it. We even have 3D renderings of it. Like, we could actually print out Palmyra if we wanted and just put it on our tables, right? We can experience it. And then this gets into the larger question of, what does it mean to have an object, to experience an object? And especially in the digital age, right? What does it mean to have so many objects?
And that's fascinating, because now you're getting into that realm of those people buying those digital pieces of art for millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, real quick, before we get going, because this is going to be awesome. Just to touch on that, the idea of the Palmyra, we still have of it. Probably get as close to an avatar, three-dimensional avatar of what it used to look like, but it just doesn't have that. There's nothing beats walking on the dusty dirt around it, like being in. And it's interesting, when my wife and I were in Egypt several years ago, we went to Ramses Abu Simbel, which is famous. And I was all excited until I realized that in 1969, the Egyptians basically took that temple down from its original location because they needed to flood it. They were going to flood it for the Aswan Dam. So they took the original temple apart block by block and moved it to its current location. And when we were at the airport waiting for our little puddle jumper flight to get to there, they were actually showing on TV, just kind of as background music, the process of the modern taking it down block by block and then rebuilding it block by block. So it got to the point when we actually got to the new Abu Simbel, I was like, it feels like we're in Vegas. I was more impressed with the modern delicacy at which the modern construction workers treated that, taking it apart and then meticulously putting it back together. I was more impressed with that process than actually seeing what it looks like in its new location, just because it seemed fake to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the cleaning and preservation of art, whether that's sculptural, architectural, painting, drawing. I mean, that is an incredible process. And if you haven't already, I would just go on YouTube and just say like conservation of art, or like, repainting or cleaning of a famous artwork. And it's pretty incredible, the process. I mean, like major museums have whole sections of their museum devoted to conserving objects. And I'm gonna throw out this like crazy wild question that no curator ever wants to deal with, which is why do we have artworks, right? And why do we have these objects? And I'm going to get back a little bit to what I was saying before. It's about that experience. How do you relate to it, right? And just like you said, the dust on your shoes, the air, the smell, it's really about the experience around the object. It's about that conversation you had with that gallery dealer in France for an hour. That's what actually connected you with the artwork, right? So let's rethink objects as experiences. let's think about how we can create unique experiences around the ideas and the objects that we're presenting out there. And this starts to change the way that you look at museums. Rather than as repositories for thousands and thousands of objects, they're actually experiences for how you can relate to either those objects or those ideas. And so they become more than anything, they become educational institutions, not just repositories. When you go to a museum, you're seeing like less than 1% of their collection wherever you go.
Really?
Right? And you're never going to be able to see the entire collection. It's impossible. First of all, they don't even have the ability to show all of their collection on the wall. When you go to the Louvre, I don't even know how many objects they have in their collection, but it's definitely over 1 million. You know, it might be in the multiples of millions. And the Met too. I'm not sure if you remember, but recently the Met sold some of their objects, and it's like, or they were talking about selling them, and people were like, "Oh no, you can't sell your objects. Those are super important objects." And they're like, "But we have 10 of the same cup from the 1600s. Like, why do we need this? We can actually use that money to either buy new artwork or buy unique pieces or provide better experiences for people." And now when we think about technology, and I'll sort of dive into what technology means for this. So there is a really famous head of Nefertiti. It's pretty much, if you look up Nefertiti online, you'll see this beautiful bust that's kind of like from the neck up, and it has her head with like with her hat. It's kind of like flat at the top. Really well-known bust, and it's in the new museum in I think Berlin. That is new in Berlin. It's in Germany. And it's the only, or I don't even know if it's at that museum. I'm sorry, but it is in Germany.
Yeah.
And it's and this group of artists came in with 3D scanners into the museum, and over a course of like multiple weeks, they would take these scanners and hold them at like chest high, so they were hidden, and they would literally walk around this bust of Nefertiti, scanning it constantly and building the most precise scan of this object that exists. And then they took that and they made it public. And so now you and anyone in the world can download the bust of Nefertiti in the highest resolution, and you can print one out and you can paint it exactly like the original Nefertiti. And then you start to think, okay, why do we have the Nefertiti? What is the point of that object?
Right? Exactly. Why the original? If anybody, but there's got to. Well, you tell me.
What's the point of it, right? Yeah. Well, honestly, and this is where curators aren't going to be happy with me, is I don't actually think we need that object. I think that we need to build unique experiences around those objects, but that unique experience can be in your house. You know, you can have, I know Google Glasses aren't a thing now, but you know, there's Microsoft HoloLens and there's VR goggles.
Right.
You can put those things into unique experiences in your own home. You can have a print made of the Nefertiti, and obviously it's not going to be perfect now. Maybe in like 20 or 30 years, they can make a perfect replica of it. But we have to start thinking about the need to actually hold objects too. And this ultimately is, why do we need to concern ourselves with things that are being looted or destroyed? We actually need to we need to digitize them in such a way that they can be replicated for the moment that we need them, for the moment that we need to talk about a culture. We're not talking about all the history of Leonardo da Vinci just by showing one piece of just by showing the Mona Lisa. We need to give all the context around it. We need to have books that have writing on on how he lived his life. We need to talk about where he was when he painted this painting, right? But in the meantime, you're taking all these objects and you're putting them in a warehouse or in a storage room for decades upon decades upon decades. So it just sits there, right? Why not just print those out? Why not print out the whole exhibition in your house?
I see.
The Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands scanned every single painting in their collection. You can actually go on their website and you can download a high resolution scan that is exactly like the paintings on the wall.
Yeah.
And you can print it out for less than $100 and have almost an original painting on your wall. Now, mind you, it's a print,
Right.
but it's the exact same image, right?
I think, and obviously technology, and that's the future. So it's going that direction, and you probably can't even stop it. It bums me out a little bit because, to me, being able to say that I've been actually there, like, again, walking around in the floor. I mean, see, here it comes. What's the other really popular museum in Paris? The one that has what you basically walk in the main atrium and it's just statues.
The Musée
Yes,
d'Orsay.
yes.
Yeah, Musée d'Orsay.
There's my favorite part of that was literally walking up to this gorgeous statue, and it's really ornate subject matter, and just kind of getting in real close and just trying to figure out even how these guys did that.
I love that too.
Yeah, but it bums me out that it seemed like that's going to be going away.
It's not going away.
Okay.
It's not going away.
Okay.
That's not what I'm saying. But actually, you just described yet again an experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to sort of like disassociate the history and our obsession with objects. And this ultimately is like a broader idea. And this is a very like young idea too, I think, for like a younger generation, which is, why do we have things? Why do we have objects? And why are we consuming more when so much of the world is being consumed over and over and over again? And we keep these objects thinking that they have some sort of value to us. And oftentimes they have an emotional value. But once we pass, they lose a lot of that history. They lose a lot of that value because they're tied to someone unique.
Yeah.
Experiences are immemorable, right? When we think about the travels that we do, when we think about going to Bilbao, and going to the Guggenheim in Bilbao, you think about the experience of walking in that building and the crazy, beautiful building that you're on, and even like the artwork is secondary to the building. It's about the experience of walking in there, right? All of our travels, we travel to other countries to experience cultures, to experience art, to experience food, to experience sounds, smells. If you go to India, you're experiencing smell. All of these are experiences. And so how do we recreate experiences? How do we rethink? Again, this is like the very first thing I was talking about. Rethink our engagement with museums and what we actually hold museums accountable for. They need to create unique experiences that are both educational, engaging, and memorable. I remember I was 16 years old. I was very fortunate. My mother took me, actually, I was sort of like the sideshow. My mother took my sister to Italy because she had graduated college. And I was 16 years old, and I was like the happy clam, being able to go to Italy, go to Europe for the first time. And she took me to not the Uffizi, was it the Uffizi Gallery in Rome? And it's like it's filled with like, it's pretty much like walking into an art history book. Right. And she's standing be in front of the Venus of Botticelli, which, for those who don't know, it's like it's a woman standing on a shell in like it's almost like a lagoon ocean environment, and she's naked, and it's Eve, right? And she's got the apple there, and it's just this beautiful image. But when you see it in person, it's actually a huge painting. It's so impactful to you, right? And that experience was so strong for my mother. She literally started breaking down in tears in front of that painting because that experience was so unique, right? And we can and we should travel to museums. We should travel around the world for experiences. But if you want to go see an object, if you want an object, if you yearn for an object, then yeah, just like look it up online or print it out, or find another way of engaging with it. Museums can do the same thing. They're also in some ways selecting the objects that for their walls to create those experiences. And that's a good thing, right? They're never going to take the Venus of Botticelli off of their walls at that gallery.
Um, I've got a couple questions here. So then in your view, so let's just use the National Museum in Baghdad. So they go in and they take these priceless artifacts, and the book that I read, it talks about just how meticulous this operation was. It was almost like military type operation where the thieves knew exactly where they were going in the museum, exactly what pieces to take, and then those pieces are gone conceivably forever. So now they're out there. I would assume it's black market type art sales. And then the person who buys that thing knows full well that he'll never be able to sell it, or she would never be able to sell it because obviously it's a stolen piece of property. And so they now are just going to hold on to it. And like you said, when that person's gone, what are their offspring going to think about that? Is it going to hold the same importance? And then all of a sudden, who knows what's going to happen at that point? But why is it that people do that? Is it just for ego to say that I have this thing that nobody else would ever be able to have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's ego / narcissism, which is very similar, right? And it's power also to be able to get your hands on those things. I mean, there's so much black market art around the world. It's incredible. I mean, there are so many laws to prevent it, but then it's almost like there's no way of knowing at some point what is black market and what is a fake. There's
Really?
there's a lot of objects from, like, say, South America that are replicated, and you can literally walk into a store in Colombia, because I live there, or any other store, and you can buy an exact replica of a piece of gold or a ceramic object that was originally like 2 or 3 thousand years old. You can't leave the country with the original, but there's no difference between the original and the new one unless you do carbon dating. They're like so precise at replicating those objects that it's kind of like everyone has access to it, right? Everyone can have those things and they can bring it with them. And they may be like, okay, where'd you get it? And you say, oh, I got it in the store in whatever market. And they're like, okay, go on, right? But you could say that and they wouldn't know the difference. I mean, even a curator would look at it and be like, no, they look the same. In fact, like, curators for centuries have been tricked into believing that objects are one thing and they were actually replicas, or they belong to a different artist. I mean, there are when you walk in to see the David in Florence, right? You're walking in to see that. And it's so amazing, and it's got that long hallway. And on the sides, this is my favorite part, are all the unfinished sculptures, right? And they say, oh, they're all by the students of Da Vinci, right? Or Michelangelo. Sorry, yeah. All the Italian artists of Michelangelo. They're all the students of Michelangelo, right? And then occasionally they'll say, well, we're not actually sure if it was a student. This actually could have been Michelangelo, but maybe he had someone helping work on it. And then you're like, okay, well, who actually made anything? I mean, if you look at art, look at the history of art, and you look at it, especially now, these mass objects that are being produced, they're not actually made by the artists many times. They're made by people who can manufacture things, right? When you talk about the sculptures that, big sculptures in parks or in at buildings, those are manufactured in studios where the artist says, I need you to do this and need you to do that. The artist very rarely actually makes them, right? And so the same thing was happening with Michelangelo. He probably had a ton of interns, that he was paying like nothing to make all these sculptures. And then they're saying, oh, they're the students of Michelangelo. But really, it's all just like, it's all mixed together.
Interesting. Very interesting perspective there.
So then, going back to the objects and what's real and what's fake, there's a great film, and I can't remember it right now, but it's the name of it. I'll pull it up. It's about the Knoedler Gallery in New York, and this woman who had been, she had been at the gallery. She was the gallery director, very well regarded. And this gallery sells, you're talking about major post-war artists, right? You're talking about Pollock. You're talking about, and God, the names are, there's so many art names that are flying through my head right now. You're talking about major post-war artists. And so this woman comes in and says, like, I have a collector. I work for a collector who has a whole bunch of these artworks. Not a whole bunch, but he's got a few that he's interested in selling. Here they are. And she's like, okay, we'll bring them in. She brought them in, took a look, had them appraised, valued. And she's like, okay, these are the real thing. We should start selling them. And so she reached out to her clients. And this is, at a time where everyone is really interested in seeing a work by Pollock or Motherwell, or even Jasper Johns, although I don't think Jasper Johns was part of this specific group. But they're really interested in these works from this time period. And so she starts selling them. And then someone says, I don't know if this is real. I'm going to have it valued through my person. And then once I evaluate it, then I'll buy it, right? And so they have it appraised and evaluated. And they're like, no, this isn't real. Absolutely not. 100% it's not real.
Right.
And so he goes back and he says, yeah, it's, the woman says, well, I don't believe that person. I've had it evaluated and it's real. And so then it's this back and forth between what is real and what's not.
Right.
And then you start getting into the idea again of ego, narcissism, and power. Who controls and who has these objects that we believe are real, one, or two, are real, but who's enjoying them, who's visiting them. Yeah. And I'm gonna go back to the museum that you brought up in Baghdad. Most of those objects that were stolen are probably in the hands of some very wealthy person. They may not ever see the light of day again. They may not ever be seen by public, but also most objects will never be seen by the public anyway, too. And so then you're like, okay, is it really like devastating to the world? They're not grabbing those objects and destroying them, not like Palmyra, right? They're saving them. They're just saving them for themselves. History will show their faces. Objects like the works that were stolen by the Nazis. I mean, just like a couple of years ago, they found an apartment that was abandoned, filled with paintings from 70 years ago that were taken by the Nazis, right? Those objects aren't going away. They will make their way back to museums. Yeah. But there are bigger issues at play. There are issues of cultural heritage. There's issues of the knowledge that's associated with them. Yeah. And there's also political dynamics. One of the most famous looted objects is the Elgin marbles, which is at the British Museum in London. And the British Museum says, well, we secured these Elgin marbles, which come from Greece, I think from the Acropolis. And these Elgin marbles are being preserved in our space, and we will take care of them. We will never let them be touched. They will never be destroyed. They're going to be seen by millions of people every year. What is the benefit here? Do we hold on to them at the British Museum, even though they were probably not taken under the best of circumstances? Yeah. They're probably taken illegally. In fact, the majority, all 100% of the objects from Egypt that are outside of Egypt were not taken legally. They were taken by archaeologists saying, I'm going to go preserve this. I'm going to go study this. And then they take it to London. They take it to New York. They take it to Paris. They take it to these other places and they do all the study and then they put it in their storage room and no one ever sees it again. Or they put it on display and say, look how amazing this was, from Egypt, from thousands of years ago, right? And they say, this is so important. Well, Greece wants those Elgin marbles back and they are pressuring them, right? And they say, you looted,
Yeah.
British citizens came in, looted those marbles, and you now have them in a museum and they belong in our museums. We should be taking care of them. In fact, a lot of museums now are doing, and this is called repatriation of objects. And the repatriation of objects is a huge conversation because the majority of objects that come from Africa, come from Greece, come from Asia, come from South America, a lot of those objects have been stolen.
Yeah.
Or the idea of we are going to preserve, we need to own, we have to have the power that's infused with these objects and the power to say we own them. You can come and have an amazing experience at our museum and visit these objects, right? So let's take away all of that, right? That's sort of like the point of what I'm saying. Let's take away the power of all of these people who have stolen these objects for thousands of years, right? Mainly the last few hundred years, but even 1,000 years, stolen these objects and put them in their museums to try to create a unique experience in their space. Now,
let me just counteract that, because this is fascinating, is you might argue that England would be a more stable environment for that piece of artwork to be preserved, as opposed to Greece or Egypt. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, and as you were talking about this, repatriating, I read a great book about how the Pope way back in 1500s, Napoleon, and then English, and then the obelisk that's in New York. They all have obelisks from Egypt, and a couple of them, at the time the Egyptian ruler was like, he was using that as a bargaining chip for better relations or advantageous relations with these imperial powers. I am just picturing in my head what would happen if the Egyptians said, we want our Luxor wants one of its obelisks back, and see how that goes over. But yeah, and you never hear about those type of diplomatic issues.
I mean, you don't hear about it because no one wants to talk about it. It's a sore subject, it's the purest example of colonization. And people are like, I don't want to admit that our country or our objects come from, excuse me, but death, rape, and like
pillage.
Pillage, right? Yeah. Like no one wants to admit that. No one wants to admit like the history of the United States, right? No one wants to admit the history of like Spaniards and the Portuguese coming to the Americas and what they did. That's not a fun subject, and so they tend to gloss over those ideas because it brings up a lot of angst, and it brings a lot of history, and it brings a lot of destruction ultimately of cultures. I mean, if you're talking about oftentimes those objects were stolen because those cultures were colonized and overtaken by people that, whether it was ISIS or whether it was the Roman Empire. Some people right now would say, thank God for the Roman Empire, because now Catholicism is across the world, right? But the Roman Empire killed thousands of cultures, languages, destroyed objects, took over land, destroyed land. I mean, like, it's like, what's the balance here, right? What's the political take that you're gonna have?
And I mean, this is basically a philosophical question, and the concept is, would human civilization advanced to where we are today if cultures that, this is going to come across really bad, but
we're talking about it, man. It's okay. It's okay.
It's the whole concept of the strong survive and they take out the weak. And would we be at the point where we are today? And some would argue that, where human civilization is today is not really that much different than the Roman Empire, except we can walk on the moon now and shoot things into space. That's a very philosophical conversation to have about just the natural order of things and progression, which I think is the human experience, is to get as
To progress.
to become as much, to progress as much as you can. And sometimes that requires other things going away. And I'm not saying right or wrong. It's just a fascinating thing to talk about. And then when you talk about it in the context of art in museums, it makes those museums that much more important.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes them important from the perspective, from both perspectives, you know, from the people saying, you know, screw you, you're part of the problem. And also the people who are saying, kind of like what you said, this museum is actually saving these works.
Yeah.
You know, like who knows if we repatriated, if they would be destroyed or looted and go somewhere else and disappear for 100 years, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a really hard philosophical question. And oftentimes there's a lot of museums who don't want to do the research to find out the provenance or the history of the object. They don't want to go through the conversations because they have to face those histories.
Yeah.
And then they have to face their board of directors, you know, who are giving the money to maintain those objects.
Right.
Money is often power, right, in that situation. And they're going to say, no, I'm not going to give away our objects. That's a huge treasure to us. That's what creates the experience and the uniqueness of our museum. I'm gonna just reference an article here. This came out in the New York Times, August 3rd, so 10 days ago. And the title is Iraq Claims 17,000 Looted Artifacts, Its Biggest Ever Repatriation.
Wow.
The cuneiform tablets and other objects had been held by the Museum of the Bible, founded by the family that owns Hobby Lobby, craft store chain, and by Cornell University.
So they bought many of those cuneiform tablets that were stolen out of the museum. Is that?
I mean, not recently. You're talking about like all these objects that had been collected over, you know, whatever amount of time from auctions, from wherever, and they repatriated all those objects. They sent them. They literally, like the ambassador of Iraq got on the plane with 17,000 objects and flew to Iraq.
And so their situation is paying for them of the family's generosity them back. How does that work?
No, they just go back.
Really?
There's no the payment is usually, well, I mean I think this is getting into like the weeds. I don't know who exactly handles the payment of these because I'm not in that negotiation table, right? But it could either be Iraq is like, well, we're going to pay for them to all be flown out, right? Yeah. Or we'll pay for them to be created. We'll pay like $100,000 or $200,000 to have everything put in crates, right? Yeah. And then for them to be put on the plane. That could be one, or the people could be like, we understand the importance of having these objects and we're going to pay for them to be created. Oftentimes they're already created because they're like in some sort of preservation holding. Right. And then they go back they get them to the plane. And then once they're in the country, they're back in the country and it's up to them to decide.
And so according to that article, the Hobby Lobby family, did they have those tablets just in a warehouse, or did they have them in their house where they could enjoy them?
I mean, so the majority of those objects were from the Museum of the Bible, which is a museum in Washington. I'm reading the article here that was founded and funded. I'm reading specifically by the Christian evangelical family that owns the Hobby Lobby craft store chain 4 years ago. Wow. So those artifacts from Mesopotamia were intended to provide context for Old Testament events. So it was all about capturing the history of Christianity and showing those things, all for religious purposes, right? Yeah. And it's not necessarily that they brought those objects or they stole those objects, but they were part of the provenance of those objects. They knew that when they got them, that they did have a history to them. Yeah. And their goal was to bring them all together, to have a collection, to tell a story, to have an experience for someone
Yeah.
in a museum, right? And that at some point, I don't know what point, they decided that, hey, these objects actually have have an important cultural history that is not our culture.
Yeah.
It needs to go back to the culture from which they belong.
And kind of going back to the question I had just a couple of minutes ago, is Iraq stable enough to handle that? And if it's not, then the inevitable would happen that they steal, that they could be stolen again. But like you said, the inside the museum is only a tenth of what they have. So you just hope that the storage facility, wherever that is in Iraq, yeah, fascinating,
Yeah,
fascinating
I mean,
conversation.
I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah,
Ultimately, I think that's up to Iraq to decide,
yeah,
right? I think they have the ability to preserve them as long as the government is preserved. And
yeah,
I think, I give the U.S. a lot of credit, and especially diplomatic chains for the U.S. The Department of State does a lot of work to maintain countries in a way that they don't go into conflict.
yeah,
For me to see right now, just in the news that's happening right now this week, is Taliban taking over, retaking over Afghanistan. It's a terrible thing, but there's longer histories, that are involved in this. What is it going to look like for the culture of Afghanistan in 100 years?
right.
Oftentimes, the Chinese are praised for thinking long term. They don't even think in 100-year periods, they think in 1,000-year periods. We sort of need to do the same thing. We need to think about what it means to maintain cultures and maintain societies in longer periods of time,
Yeah,
so that we can preserve those cultures in a way that is prosperous and beneficial to the world. We, you and I think many people are very worldly because we've been able to travel, because we've been able to go to all these different countries and
right.
have these wonderful experiences, right? But that being said, some of those experiences, some of those cultures may change over time. And so it's important to remember those and log them. But again, they're experiences. They're somewhat
Yeah,
ephemeral.
yeah,
And so our goal, I think the State Department's goal ultimately, like this is my perception of the State Department, is to make sure that the relationships in those countries are maintained so that those countries are stable
yeah,
enough to preserve their own cultures,
yeah,
right? And once they're able to do that, culture thrives. You don't have to worry about people walking into a museum and stealing things. It's not that it's not going to happen. You're going to get museums that will be looted, that people will walk in and steal things. It's bound to happen,
right.
right? But at the massive scale of what happened in Iraq during the war, that doesn't happen unless a country is
Yeah, complete chaos. Yeah,
right, and then
yeah,
you lose culture.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's a
Wow.
sad thing, I think, for humanity, really.
Yep. No, no, I completely agree with you. Yeah, this has been a wild conversation. And it's you know, again, going back to this would have been a very different conversation with me 10 years ago. But even though I still completely realize that I don't know much about art at all, other than kind of the a feeling that I get looking at certain objects. Yeah, it's fascinating to think of it in the context of just civilizations rising and falling and yeah, wow.
It is. It's a much bigger story than us in this world right now.
Yeah,
And even us right now, and like taking the context of people making things and reproducing things and replicating things, all of these things that we touched upon in this conversation, it's happening right now before our eyes, but in 50 years or 100 years, they'll look back and say, oh, you remember when this happened? And
yeah,
now look what has evolved from that,
yeah,
right? That's what history is. It's making those connections, very much like what you said, we wouldn't be here today if the Romans hadn't created their empire, the Moors hadn't gone against the Romans and built Spain to create an empire that then wanted to expand their space and then eventually ended up in the Americas, destroying civilizations, killing people, pillaging the land, and building a space for the British to send their prisoners and the people that they didn't want to the US, who then created their own land and then wanted to remember that history of their own people and build museums around that, that then turned around and said, we want to understand the history of the world and our place within the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
it's all mine, right?
Yeah. And so this question just kind of popped in my head is the concept of repatriating cultures that have already been rolled over, is that a good thing right now? It in my mind, that seems like that's a recipe for chaos.
It's only a recipe for chaos if the place where it's going is in chaos, right? If you return all the sculptures, all the sculptures of Benin back to Benin, then it's great as long as the people of Benin can see those sculptures.
Yeah.
But if Benin is in war,
yeah,
and the museums are being destroyed, literally the building is being destroyed from the outside and it's being pillaged from the inside, not a good idea to send those objects, right?
Yeah.
And you never know when that's going to happen. I mean, look, the US, and I'll just take it because we're here, we're North Americans, we're from the US, and so we look at our civilization as being, this is our empire that we have right now in this point of time. This empire won't last forever. Even like the Chinese empires that have changed, they've changed hands and they've changed forms so many times over thousands of years, right? The United States, we want it to be here forever, right? Like we love the U.S. We love what it means to be American, what it means to be free. Whether that's like from all the different perspectives, you know, if it's like rugged individualism or libertarianism or very liberal perspectives. And, you know, there's all of that is we care about the US. We care about the history that's there, right? And so we want to preserve what's here. But at some point, there will be a war, right? And let's say that war happens and the Met gets destroyed, right? Like people will be in tears, you know, and it's a terrible thing. But that being said, life goes on and it will just be a moment in history. It's kind of like, you know, the Notre Dame when it burnt down, right? Like as soon as that happened, I'm sitting there on my phone looking at pictures of me and my daughter in front of Notre Dame, right? And we're like, oh, I remember that time. And I remember the experience. I'm going to throw that out again. The experience of being there, right? And you know, it's sad because the spire is gone. They're going to rebuild it, right? It's not going to be the original. But then again, what's the difference between it being rebuilt and what it was originally? Right.
And and that was formerly a Roman temple that they built on top of it, and eventually it became the Notre Dame that we know today. It just and I think the thing that, and obviously this is something that I need to work on, and I have been, and that is change. Change is the only constant. Things rise, things fall, things change. No, nothing stays the same. The only thing that stays the same is your experience that you had with that.
That's right. That is exactly right.
Wow.
And you know, on top of that, like, change is constant. I love that. I feel like that should be the title for the podcast. Change is constant.
You know what? There we go. Done. I love it.
That's it.
Well played, sir. I'll definitely change is the only constant is change. And then in parentheses, in the context of art.
Yes.
And,
exactly.
and civilization.
And art and civilization, right? Like what a conversation, right? Art and civilization.
Man.
Yeah.
I love it. This is awesome, Andrew. Hey, so when you were a curator at one of the museums that you used to work with, what is that process like to say, okay, we're interested in this style. I'd like to try to go after one of these artists' paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And then give me your kind of your most memorable experience in that sort of in that process.
Well,
If you ever did that.
yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, I'm going to give like a very unique a unique reference because I'm in the world of contemporary art. So I curated a video art festival, and video art is not really often understood or considered. It's like, oh, there's films,
Yeah.
and then there's like art. You know, what's the difference between the two here? And video art is like it's four-dimensional artwork, where it's moving images, but from an abstract or painterly or even documentary perspective. It's and usually they're shorter segments. So anyway, I'm doing research on video artists, and this is probably about 15 years ago that I did this. And when I was curating, there's not a lot of, you're talking about the internet is like definitely has a lot of information on it by the mid 2000s, not like it does today, but it has a lot of good information, and you can do some searching. Some people occasionally have websites, right? But it involves actually a lot of conversations with people in different countries. And so I'm contacting curators from all over the world saying, hey, I'm looking for video art. I would love for you to send me some names, send me some links, if there's like a YouTube or a Vimeo thing, and just send me images, send me information.
Right.
And then they send me that information, and I cull through it, and I say, oh, this kind of fits with what I'm looking at. This is like the theme that I'm trying to present. These are the ideas that I'm trying to convey, right? This is the experience that I want people to have. And so a lot of it comes from that. It starts with an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that idea, you find things that work with that idea. And then you cull those things down into the best presentation of that idea possible using many different people's artworks. And that's usually how an exhibition happens when the curatorial process starts.
Yeah.
Sometimes from a historical perspective, in terms of curating more historical work that has been created, you know, let's say 20 or 50 or 100 years before, it's much more of I have an idea specifically about the history of these works, and I want to investigate that more. So I do research, and I present this idea, I present this thesis statement through the artwork that I'm presented. So I have to identify very specific works that emphasize that idea. But again, it all starts with an idea. It's all about ideas here. You know, we're not talking about just showing objects because they're beautiful, because they're wonderful, but we're showing objects because they promote an idea or a concept or a feeling about what's happening in the world.
And is a curator's job, or is a curator's training, is it just, I think this would be interesting, or is it more like how much of the bigger picture of the urban and the civilization that's the wrong word, but are the curators like, I think the city of Encinitas would like this, or is it more like, I love this, and you know, we'll try to get people in here?
Yeah, oftentimes it's the latter on that.
Yeah.
You know, we curators are very pretentious in the sense, I sometimes fall into this category, often unknowingly, but you know, we're pretentious in the sense that we think we know, and we want to be able to share with everyone what we know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reach over here because I need to plug my computer in because I forgot to do that.
Well, and actually continue on this thought, and I will probably close it off after this, just so I'm not taking up too much of your time, but definitely continue, because this is what I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's this challenge, right? When people have a desire to know about something, right? And but it's usually about something that they know or they want to know.
Yeah.
Right. And then the curator says, well, but you don't even know anything about this. And they're like, well, no, because I'm a rock, you know, like what you said, or like, I have no interest in that, or, you know, I didn't even know that existed. Well, in some ways, that's the curator's responsibility to show you that something actually existed.
Hey, Andrew, hold on, because it just sunk in. Did you just call me a rock?
I didn't. You called yourself a rock, man.
Okay, gotcha. It just hit me. Now, it's funny because
I'm going to send you a little present later on.
So it's funny because when I think about subjects for the podcast, right? I don't think I'm thinking of it in terms of in an ego way, but the way I think of it, I say, if I'm interested in it, there's got to be a lot of other people out there in the world that would be interested in it as well. And so why not expose that to as many people as possible? So, and you're saying that sometimes it's that way, sometimes it's to be able to say that I'm the curator and this is how much I know.
Yeah. I mean, it's a back and forth. And I think ultimately like museums, not just curators, but museums struggle with that because they want people in the door.
Yeah.
Right. And they want to make sure that people are getting what they want. Sometimes they don't even realize that that what they want is something unique. Change is constant. Right. Yeah. I'm curious about you. Like, how often do you survey your viewers and say like, hey, what do you want to hear? And then I'm going to respond to that and create something.
And the answer is I haven't done that yet, but that's actually a very good idea.
Everyone's like, yeah, Brian, why haven't I gotten my survey?
Exactly. Hey, and by the way, if you like the content, hit the like button and subscribe. It's one of the questions I wanted to have as when you were doing the curating, and then so you identify the art, and then do you buy it outright, or what's the general like in general? Is it they rent it for perpetuity, they rent it for 30 years, they buy it outright, so now it belongs to how does that work?
Oh my God, that's a much deeper conversation.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of different pathways there, and without getting too much into it, depending upon the museum that is actually presenting the work, they could already own it, they could purchase it for their collection, they could receive a loan from another museum or another collector, or they can commission new artwork. They can present digital examples of that artwork on screens, or they could 3D print objects. There's like so many different levels of types of engaging with pieces for a show. Yeah.
Wow. Well,
and each one of those is like a podcast on its own.
There you go. Well, I'd love to have you back on again. We'll come up with another topic again sometime, but this was fascinating. And it's to be honest with you, this is exactly what I was looking for. And so I really appreciate your time, Andrew.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, I'm loving this, and I love to talk about these things. I could honestly talk for hours about this stuff. So I appreciate it.
No problem. And again, it's ICS.org. Is that going to be the new website?
ICA San Diego.
Excuse me. ICA.org.
ICA.org. That's it.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And that goes, ICA San Diego.org goes live shortly. And then September 10th is when it's official.
That's official.
Love it.
That's us. Yeah.
I love it. Andrew,
thanks so much.
No, this was my pleasure. And let me just close it out by saying, if you're in the military, police departments, fire departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. Andrew, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And thanks to all those you just thanked as well. We really appreciate your service and your support of this great country and this beautiful city that we live in. Thank you.
All right. Hey, listen, guys, it's the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake replicas@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.